Welcome to Hood Champion Boxing and Sports. In boxing, you find a way to win or you find a way to lose. When it comes to Errol Spence and Terence Crawford, I think fans are split on who they think is going to actually win this fight. I think it's a 50-50 fight, and I'm going to leave it as that. But I think the argument really boils down to, and it's such a complex matchup because we know the depth of the skill sets of both of these fighters. But to simplify things, I think we can boil the argument down to who's going to win, and can a good small man beat a good big man? Or is it always that a good big man beats a good small man? Because we know good small men aren't supposed to beat good big men in boxing, right? We saw that, where we had Errol Spence in particular with Mikey Garcia. You guys remember Mikey Garcia challenged Errol Spence? Now, Mikey Garcia did a lot of damage from 126 to 140. And Terence Crawford, 135, 140, and 147. And the thing about it, when you talk about somebody that has lethal combinations and then a lethal combination of skill, power, also, and this is probably one of the most important attributes that doesn't get talked about, is just, mentally tough, resilient. And that is Terence Crawford, 100%. And he's mean as hell. So when you look at Terence Crawford, you think about, you know what? He's smaller than Errol Spence. I'd have to say, well, maybe we should stop and really understand Terence Crawford standing 5'8", 5'9". Terence Crawford just one of those guys who's able to melt down to 135. Even yesterday, I was listening to Rolly Romero talk about how getting down to 135 wasn't an issue. He just felt weak. And at 140, it's still a bit of a struggle. He'll see how he feels. And if not, he's going to 147 where he feels the most comfortable. When you think about it like that, what that tells you is these guys probably should be fighting at 147. And a guy like Terence Crawford was just able to do like Devin Haney and get his weight down to this 135-pound weight for a moment in time. And then, of course, they balloon back up. But I'm going to tell you this. Sometimes, man, when you have a brave challenger, some people could say that a brave challenger is doomed. But I will say this. When it comes to Errol Spence being a good big man, there's no way in the world Errol Spence can get down to 135. And that's why we have to look at this and say Terence Crawford is naturally a smaller man. Errol Spence is not. The struggle that Terence Crawford faced to get to 135, that's what Errol Spence faced to get down to 147. But I'm gonna tell you this, right? The mission for Terence Crawford to beat Errol Spence, it's not impossible. Now, I'm gonna tell you this. There have been instances where the smaller fighters, high-profile fighters, they've come up in weight and, they've stunned the boxing world and they beat bigger opponents. Now, I'm going to tell you something about Terence Crawford that I think gives him the best chance of beating Errol Spence. It's not his counterpunching. It's not his legs, right? It's not his resiliency. I keep saying it. It's his eyes. When I watch Terence Crawford fight, he is locked in on his opponent. He can see everything they're doing. He can almost anticipate what these guys are going to do. And even if he can't, once he gets through a round or two with you, he starts to figure things out really quickly. And then you see the fight immediately starts to go one direction. In addition to that, once he goes southpaw, I call him southpaw man. Once he goes in the phone booth and turns into southpaw man, the fight ends anyway. But for me, it's the eyes. Terence Crawford is always watching. and he's just able to see everything. He's in his ability to counterpunch, punch with you. It's just amazing, and I think that's going to give. And he has an extremely high accuracy rate, and I think that's going to be the biggest difference in this fight. Is Terence Crawford being able to see everything Errol Spence is coming to do, and he's going to need to use those eyes because Errol Spence just has an extremely high work rate, and he's going to be in there to basically break down the small man and make him realize that he shouldn't be in the ring with him. But there are good small men who've moved up, and, they got big wins against bigger opponents. Even here where you talk about years ago, Spinks and Larry Holmes. A lot of y'all probably don't remember. You know what I'm saying? When Larry Holmes went to fight Spinks, he wasn't supposed to, when Spinks went to fight Holmes, he really wasn't supposed to win that fight. But I think a lot of people forget that, Spinks was a gold medalist. And although he was fighting at light heavyweight, he brought a lot to the table as far as skill set. Okay? So moving up to fight a guy like Larry Holmes, although he was 175, you're talking about 25 pounds that Spinks had to gain, that seemed like a bad idea. But what happened is, you saw in that fight where Spinks, he just outworked Holmes. Never really hurt him, although he was outweighed by, 21 pounds. So it was tough for him to hurt Holmes. But he was just being consistent enough to win a close unanimous decision. And that's what he did, man. And there were guys before him, the Billy Conns, Archie Moores, Bob Fosters, they just couldn't move up and fight the big man and get the win. But at the end of the day, Spinks went on to say, look, I didn't see any signs that Holmes was in trouble, but I was frustrating him. And I was making him miss a whole lot. And I was landing more. And I'll tell you this, Spinks went on to fight several more times and continued to defend that belt. So with a guy like Terence Crawford and Errol Spence, I could see this getting to a situation where Spence gets frustrated because Crawford's not necessarily going to sit there on the ropes and just let you bang on him. But Crawford is sneaky. He can touch Spence, and he can make Spence think twice if Crawford can continue to land with that pinpoint accuracy, especially when Errol Spence tries to come in and get him on the ropes, because Errol Spence has things he does that are very, very, very effective. But his work rate, and this is the thing, when you're punching a whole lot, that leaves you open. And Terence Crawford, like I said, he has the eyes to recognize those openings and exploit the offense and the lack of defensive responsibility of Errol Spence. So we could see a situation like with Spinks and Holmes, with Crawford and Spence. But I think the better comparison is probably Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler. Let me tell you something. A lot of people thought that was just ludicrous for Leonard to come and challenge Marvin Hagler. Remember, man, Sugar Ray Leonard had retired. He had a detached retina, but he decided to come back. He was more athletic, just like Crawford. I would say Crawford's more athletic than Errol Spence. And Leonard, I'd say faster hands. I'd say Crawford has faster hands. And he just outworked Hagler. And Hagler and Errol Spence have a very similar style. They're just going to come forward and try to outwork you. The difference here is Crawford really isn't into trying to build a lead on the front end. Errol Spence is a guy who's trying to build a lead on the front end. But Leonard, in Leonard's case, he was all about building a lead. But at the end of the day, when it came to Leonard and Hagler, you saw that the smaller man, the guy who could think a little quicker, react a little quicker, counterpunch, and let his hands go and get out the way, he was able to win the fight. And I'll tell you what, Leonard rejoiced that we could see a situation where Crawford, the same way, is able to get his shots off, get his combinations off, get out the way, and not allow Errol Spence to basically bully him. In addition to that, I'm going to tell you what's concerning me is when Errol Spence and the fact that he has a partial in his mouth, and he's very, very concerned when he gets into a boxing match about that partial flying out of his mouth if he gets it knocked out. And he said that's what caused him to leave himself open when he fought Ugas. He thought his partial had come out of his mouth and landed on the ring. And I just think those are things that are just going to help Terence Crawford even more in the fight, because Errol Spence isn't going to be able to totally lock in on his opponent the way he wants to, because he has these other things that he's worried about. And it's very unfortunate the car accident he went through and the injuries that he suffered is very unfortunate. But the reality is those are things that he's worried about, and especially in the ring in a big fight against Terence Crawford. That's not good. Okay? But what we could see happen, like Leonard and Hagler, when it comes to Crawford and Spence, is, is there going to be a rematch or not? We know Hagler and Leonard never had a rematch. I'm not sure what Crawford's going to do, what Spence is going to do. No one knows what the hell's going on with these two guys except that there are conversations. But I would think that there would be some kind of rematch clause, and unlike Leonard and Hagler never having a rematch, I think Crawford and Spence would definitely have a sequel. But then again, you never know, because Spence dreads getting down to 147 pounds. He says it's just mission impossible. Okay? Another example of a good small man beating a good big man is Hopkins when he went and fought Antonio Tarver. Remember Antonio Tarver, he was up at, he had to come down from heavyweight, losing all that weight. And Tarver had beat Roy Jones and fought a tough fight against Glenn Johnson. But Hopkins, like always, he's another guy who fights with his eyes. Hopkins will fight dirty too. But boxing skills, man. Being an elusive target, landing the cleaner punches. That's kind of Terence Crawford style. And he was able to get a knockdown. And I think in this fight, Terence Crawford may be able to get a knockdown. And remember, I'm just talking more from the small man versus the big man. That's if Crawford can effectively do the things that he's always been able to do. But as far as the Hopkins-Tarver fight, Tarver wasn't really able to land much on Hopkins. With Crawford and Spence, I just can't see Spence not touching Crawford at some time, but it's Spence's ability to hold opponents in place and unload. I just don't think he's going to be able to do that against Terence Crawford. But a guy like Crawford, the smaller man, faster man, I think his reflexes are a lot quicker, and Crawford has knockout power. People could talk about his resume. I don't think that's fair to talk about his resume. But I'm not telling anyone they're wrong for that, because it's a healthy conversation. But that being said, Hopkins did go on to fight till he was damn near 90 years old. And he's going down in the history books as one of the greatest fighters ever. Now, probably the one fight, which we all know about, where the smaller man really came up and punished the big man, is the Pacquiao De La Hoya. But at the end of the day, we know De La Hoya was drained. Spence, I'm not going to say Spence is going to be drained, but we know getting to 147 is tough. Spence really should be fighting at 154 or a higher weight. But at the end of the day, this could be a situation where the weight drain for Spence shows up. And Crawford does what kind of Manny Pacquiao did. He just pulls the trigger on his punches where Spence may not be able to do it. And you know what? He can't blame Crawford for that. Okay? So Crawford and Spence both have outstanding skill sets. But a good small man has a chance to beat a good big man. Okay? But then there's the other side to this, the good big man beating the good small man. And for majority of the time, the good big man will always beat the good small man. You could look at just what happened the other day with the heavyweights with Anthony Joshua and Jermaine Franklin. Joshua won that fight just because he was bigger. You look at Tyson Fury. He for the most part beats these guys because he's bigger. Hell, Nikolai Valuev. What skill set did he have? But this man was 7 foot something. Huge big man. And they're beating people. But I think to kind of frame this a little bit better, we talk about a good man beating a good small man. Shit, look at Floyd Mayweather when he fought Juan Manuel Marquez. How about that fight? That's a good example of a good big man will always beat a good small man. Now, just power-wise, resiliency-wise, skill set-wise, it can be hard for these guys to come up against fighters. And we got to be fair to Errol Spence. He has an extensive array of boxing weaponry and physical advantages. And Errol Spence can fight on the inside. He can fight on the outside. He can fight at mid-range. You know, sometimes his defense lapses a bit, but for the most part, he's defensively responsible. And when Terence Crawford is starting off slow, Errol Spence is in here putting in work. And the thing about Errol Spence is he is strong. You can't just allow Errol Spence to get shots off on you early in the fight and not expect for that to show up later in the fight as far as your body showing the effects of the early work that he put in. And that's why that could be a concern for Terence Crawford and his team and his fans going up against Errol Spence, who's the good big man in this fight. But I tell you what, when it comes to size differential between Spence and Crawford, that's going to leave some questions. Okay? Because for me, I got to say, who has Crawford fought that's as big as Errol Spence, as strong as Errol Spence, has the extensive array of boxing weaponry as Errol Spence, and has the physical advantages like Errol Spence? Somebody say, well, hey, what about Kell Brook? Kell Brook was already kind of damaged. You know what I'm saying? But that's fair. Yeah, okay, Kell Brook. But again, he's not the same Kell Brook that Sean Porter fought. Somebody was saying, oh, Amir Khan. To that I got to say, hold your horses. Amir Khan was a bit smaller. But Amir Khan was not the same Amir Khan who fought Marcos Maidana. Some would say Sean Porter. We know Sean Porter fought a lot heavier when he was an amateur. But at 147, Sean Porter's a real dog, but something didn't seem right in that fight with Sean Porter. But you got to give Crawford the credit for the win. But what I'm saying is this, man. When I take a look at this and understand these bigger fighters fighting these smaller fighters, man, let me tell you something. Height and weight can be a factor. Depending on how good the small man is, it could not be a factor. But that could be something that becomes a factor here. Especially when you got a guy who's taller, who's just naturally bigger, naturally stronger, right? And is fearless. And who's going to run across that ring, which Errol Spence is going to do, and is going to maul Terence Crawford every second of every round. It's hard to discourage Errol Spence. And once he's on you, if Crawford can't keep him off of him, then Crawford's going to have some trouble. His best opportunity is like what I said, with Crawford being a good small man, is his eyes and recognizing those openings and immediately getting his counters off. But sometimes Crawford will throw a counter, and when doing so, he gets hit because Errol Spence's work rate is so crazy that there's always a chance, although Crawford shoots a shot, that Errol Spence comes right back with something. But if Crawford lands cleanly, he can definitely tranquilize Errol Spence. And what we've seen with Errol Spence, has been a while since he's tranquilized somebody. He's hurt guys and stuff like that, but he hasn't tranquilized anyone. So if anyone were to get really hurt in this fight, whether they're on Queer Street, I would have to say Terence Crawford has that ability to get that one shot off, but it's going to be tough doing it against a really good big man like Errol Spence, who's going to be on him from round one. And if Errol Spence can have that success early in the fight, Crawford may not be so courageous and want to try to shoot shots in between Errol Spence's punches, okay? Because that could result in some serious, serious damage. Because we know Crawford can be hurt. Crawford can be hurt, okay? Errol Spence can be hurt too. But the good big man lands some hard shots on Crawford's chin, we could see Crawford get in trouble, all right? Now, I'll tell you this. Maybe you guys are saying, you know what, when it comes to Mayweather and Marquez, we all knew Marquez wasn't going to beat him. Well, look, everybody said Marquez beat Pacquiao, right? So Mayweather fought Marquez, made it look easy. Marquez and Pacquiao, always a horrible fight for Pacquiao. So Pacquiao fights Mayweather. They have a pretty competitive fight. But at the end of the day, the good big man beat the good small man. Even here with Sugar Ray Leonard, right? Duran was a smaller fighter going up to fight Sugar Ray Leonard. And Duran was at a disadvantage in both height and reach. And some people felt that he was unproven, just like some people feel Terence Crawford is unproven. And we know what happened in that fight, man. You know? Leonard handled his business. Duran got him that first fight, though. And that's the thing. But we saw what happened in that second fight. And basically forced him to just quit. But it is what it is, man. Hold on a second. Hold on one second. This thing just paused. 1 second, man. Okay. All right, it's back on. I don't know why this thing just paused, man. But I don't edit it out because I'm human. But I'm going to tell you guys this, man. When it comes to these boxers, it comes to their physical attributes, man, I just got to say, they're both amazing fighters, amazing talents. You know, they say Terence Crawford is super strong, freakish power when it comes to just being able to lift weight, when it comes to doing push-ups, sit-ups. They say he's just one of those guys who's a naturally strong human being. And they say when you get in the ring with him, you feel that power. You feel his physical strength. You feel his presence. But they say the same thing about Errol Spence, man. And when you take that and you couple that with unmeasurable characteristics, man, and these guys both wanting to be great, I tell you what, man, a lot of, I think, doubt that a person may have towards Terence Crawford or doubt a person may have towards Errol Spence, I think that comes undone. Because both of these guys have the ability to elevate their games to a whole nother level. Okay? And that's why I think it's fair to talk about a Mayweather Marquez, fair to talk about a Spinks Holmes, fair to talk about a Leonard Hagler, Duran Leonard, fair to talk about Pacquiao, De La Hoya. But one thing that's not fair is to sit here and to suggest that Terence Crawford doesn't have that find a way to win quality in him, and the same thing with Errol Spence. And for that reason, I think, you know what? Although some people may feel these two guys are ego tripping at times, I think these guys put in hard work, and it is not difficult to be impressed with what they've done so far. But I do think, if anything, we're going to see if Crawford really is the top dog at 147. Same thing with Errol Spence. But the question about Crawford, not from me, okay? But the question about Crawford that I keep seeing is how Crawford, like Errol Spence put, is light in the ass. 135, 140, 147. Errol Spence has always been at 147 pounds. How in the world can you expect a guy like Crawford to come up and clip a guy like Errol Spence? They question Crawford's resume. He's never really fought anybody in their prime who can really fight. I don't know if I agree with that. But what I will tell you is everyone Crawford's got in the ring with, he did what he was supposed to do. And if Errol Spence underestimates Crawford at all, Errol Spence is going to find himself on the losing end of the stick. And the same thing goes for Crawford. If for some reason he feels that, you know what, I am the bigger man. They think I'm the smaller man, but no, I'm the bigger man. And I'm going to show Errol Spence he could find himself in trouble. Because Crawford was getting hit by Evander Cien with some shots that he should have never got hit with. And if Errol Spence hits him with those shots cleanly, Crawford could be in trouble. So the first 4 rounds are going to be very interesting. I'm looking forward to this fight. It seems like we're getting closer and closer to a Spence versus Crawford fight. And I can't wait to see it. But I'm telling y'all right now, the good small man can beat a good big man. But most of the time, the good big man can beat a good small man and will beat a good small man. But Terence Crawford is not your average fighter. Errol Spence is not your average fighter. And we're going to find out just which one is actually going to win, once they get into the ring later this year. If it happens later this year, I think they're going to fight in the desert. That being said, y'all keep cool. Shout out to the veterans, all 7 continents. I'm in the breeze.